My microphone just fell in my pool right here, so if this sounds horrible, my bad, but I also can use this as a backup and just hope that that doesn't sound atrocious. Sorry. This is only gonna be the case for this intro, I swear. Alright, my last two videos were dedicated to this idea that I wanted to move my content in a more serious and quality-driven direction. However, I have been working on this one since November, so we're just gonna get this out of the way. The MCU should need no introduction. It is the single most successful movie franchise in history, with some of the highest grossing movies and most iconic pop culture moments ever. And the entire ride began when I was but a wee toddler. As time went on, I began to develop a passion for storytelling and film. So, you can connect the dots. I only really got into this around Ragnarok because, little baby boy. But I've really enjoyed the ride so far. However, it does not take a genius billionaire playboy philanthropist to realize that Marvel is in a bit of a tricky spot right now. From Disney's evil influence to bad choice of directors, zero creative direction, and their golden boy Kang getting flushed down the drain, it's been a rough few years for Marvel. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that people are overreacting when they say superhero films are dead. I mean, I guarantee you, in a few months, we're gonna see those same people saying that Guardians 3 is a masterpiece and superhero films are back. But considering this dip in quality has driven me further and further from Marvel over the past few years, I figured it wouldn't be too long until I never really want to return to this franchise again. So what better way to send off the franchise than to watch every single one of them? So that's what I'm gonna do. Watch every film, throw my thoughts arbitrarily on a list, and if we learn something by the end, then it was by accident. Now I would like to clarify I'm only watching phases 1 through 4 because there's no way in hell you're getting me to watch Quantumania. And as a final little note, I'm not watching The Incredible Hulk. I never put it on my list because it's on some other random streaming service and it does not seem worth buying that. And yeah, that's about all I have, so strap in, this is gonna be a long one. And without further ado, let's start this off predictably. Thor: The Dark World is infamous for being the most hated Marvel movie ever, and yeah. This movie is riddled with poor pacing, poor cinematography, poor writing, editing, directing, even music. Marvel's had this annoying little habit recently of just ignoring or making fun of their past films, but this case, it checks out. The human side characters are annoyingly important considering how unentertaining they are. Thor's Asgardian friends are just as pointless as last time. Thor isn't really funny and doesn't learn anything, so the villain is easily the most forgettable in Marvel history, and they pretty much explain all of the science magic with it's science. It's just real boring for a movie that includes the Infinity Stones, the possible destruction of 9 realms, Asgard world building, Thor committing treason alongside Loki, and a dude that even Heimdall can't detect. That is saying something. The concepts are kind of there, but there's only really 2 good executions. Thor and Loki have an unbreakable bond. Like, they are amazing in pretty much every movie they're in. And their scene where they broke out of Asgard, that was a blast. And with this came world building in Asgard society. These are the only 2 things I remember enjoying in the entire film. I unironically am convinced that they might be using iMovie sound effects. That should tell you my experience with this $170 million movie. There's a lot more nitpicks I could cover, but we don't really need to. I think it's time we just get to the fun ones. Or instead. I don't think I've ever felt so offended by any other movie in my entire life. I left this theater kind of having enjoyed myself, but then I rewatched Multiverse of Madness at home, and oh my god. I even honestly liked the opening dream sequence in this movie, but once Strange woke up, well, then he was in the real nightmare. These people really picked the romance subplot of everything Strange was going through to forward his series. Wong has literally become the go-to funny extra in these movies, and yet even he barely made me smile. As a fan of where they were headed with Wanda, they screw it all up here. Her introduction is neat, and her powers have always been awesome. But it's all just motivated by this little evil book that makes you evil. What's the point anymore? She had all the motivation right there, we just needed a deeper look into her mind. But then after all that bullshit, she's actually defeated in a pretty neat way. Hell, the entire end of the movie felt good and rewarding, even though it just wasn't like nothing had built up to this ending. At one point in this movie, Strange in America, and I shit you not, they walk up to a free memory bank that just plays your memories in front of you. A movie about bending the interdimensional laws of magic explains its main character's motives through a fucking memory vendor. Hell, the magic really gets boring. It's just orange swords for the most part. The only fun parts are like the opening, Wanda's break into Carmitage, and then Strange's like devil wings at the end. Obviously that was cool, everyone knows that part's cool. Stupid consequences, whatever, that third eye awful ending aside, putting that away, using the corpse of your alternate dimension self that you had to bury at the start of the movie to dreamwalk and save your friend, that is cool as hell. Where was that the rest of the movie? But now that we're done with that, we're able to move from hot garbage to warm garbage. I just want to quickly clarify that this movie is so much more tolerable than the last two. The Black Widow has always been a really interesting character and is pretty much Marvel's only good representation for women at this point. But they screwed it up. Color me surprised. The Natasha we follow for the majority of this movie is introduced at the 16-minute mark of a 2-hour and 16-minute movie. I think one of my notes here summarizes it best. This movie really takes its sweet time letting you know that it's skipping in the interesting part. The action scenes were always really like drawn out, but that didn't really matter considering the editing and cinematography were just weird to begin with. I mean, Yelena's fun, she's interesting, but then again,
It was fun! No!
so our only hope in this movie ends up being Natasha and the Taskmaster. Well, there's also this other like evil businessman guy. He's technically the main villain, but tell me you remember his name. I fucking dare you. Just get rid of them and then dive deeper into the Taskmaster's mentality, and then you have a really good and interesting villain already there. But what we have now is one decent fight, a lot of exposition, and a faceless character you're supposed to care about by the end. Natasha, however, is a mixed bag. While the concepts behind a lot of what she does is really cool, a lot of it is poorly executed or just weird. The family stuff is a fun idea, especially with this character. The problem is that this was kind of already done in Endgame for her, and even without that, it gets lost in the chaotic story they're trying to tell. But her running away, going off the grid, that was a really interesting story. And you know what? They handled it probably as well as they could have with this movie. There's very little saving this movie, but luckily it's some bigger things. Yelena and Natasha's relationship is pretty good, and that final fight may look horrendous, but is really creative. Like, that's cool. Again, they tried. This movie didn't really have any of the highs that Multiverse of Madness had, but it was far away from the lows, so it just kind of balances out at whatever. It's been fun, Natasha. Sorry that you had to go out with a bit of a disappointment, but I mean, it's not like your introduction was any better. I'll admit, I was not excited to see this movie. Iron Man 2 opens up with a lot of interesting stuff. Seeing Iron Man's impact across the world and the way it's changed the US government is a pretty natural progression of this story. Hell, they even go a step further with Tony himself. His egotistical side is honestly kind of growing in this movie, not only because he's privatized world peace, in his words, but also because he's using that to distract himself from the fact that Iron Man is killing him. There's so much you could explore. But what if instead, a random Russian guy builds his own arc reactor and electric whips, flies out to Monaco the same day as Tony, for Tony to then walk around aimlessly with Natasha, who at this point is just some random woman he keeps sexualizing, but then he decides to just go out onto the track because he's dying and race a car, except then the electric Russian guy comes and busts up his car, so then they fight. And that's just the first act. I never feel as tense as I did in the first movie, and that's because Tony is treated like a god. Sure, he's slowly dying, but then he just forges a new element and saves himself. I just think the problem of this movie is that they wanted to tell a really grounded and real story in a really comic booky way. Tony's going through a bunch of political turmoil and is just dying every minute of his life. But also he's dying, so he treats life like a party and just doesn't give a crap about anything, and so everything is just a joke and really dumb. It's fun, but it goes off the rails. And it's the same thing with the villains. This really goofy and narcissistic billionaire teams up with a really grounded and like depressed Russian guy. Ivan is just Obadiah without all the fun buildup. The only times I had fun in this movie were during the political stuff. But while I do generally dislike this movie for all this stuff, I do have to acknowledge that at least it has a soul. The second an opening text crawl pops up, you know Eternals isn't gonna be fun. All you know is that it's gonna be a goddamn ride. But then when 11 main characters pop up, you realize you're not prepared in the slightest. When I clicked play, I genuinely was expecting something so horrendous that it would make me want to, like, not go into Hollywood ever in my life. But instead, it was fine. Guys, it was fine. These are characters. This is a story, and it has themes. By all means, it is so much more complex than your typical Marvel movie. But I feel like my entire experience can be summarized with the phrase, "Excuse me, how?" I know this movie is bad. I watched it, and it sucked. But I want to like it. Sprite is such a fascinating character with an interesting story that just kind of gets fumbled only in the end. Icarus being this emotionless god kind of does work well with all these other characters. It just doesn't develop past this. I like Kingo and his camera guy, alright? They're funny, who cares? And Cersei's fun. She's cute, I liked her. Time is sort of the main theme and storytelling device. Every building block is here. They just use Elmer's glue to put it all together. The script is really bland, and it doesn't do any of these neat actors any justice. And all these really cool existential themes we've never seen in a Marvel movie, well, that becomes second fiddle to the main family storyline. They also just keep throwing love triangle after love triangle in this group. It's so pointless. It really gives this family theme a whole different meaning. Maybe with a different director or writer, the Eternals could have been a Marvel-changing franchise, but as it stands, they're just lifeless. And now I'm worried this movie's gonna be treated the same way Marvel treats the first two Thor movies. Just forgotten. But speaking of which, Thor's a wacky little movie. For Marvel's fourth stab at the big screen ever, it was fine. I personally find the morals of the royal trio pretty compelling. Thor is so accustomed to his privileged-ass life on Asgard that he becomes just the right amount of dumb, smart, and fun when he gets down to Earth. Loki is a pretty compelling character. He may be corny, but he still carries this movie's humor. And Odin, even though he snoozes for like 90% of this movie, actually adds something to the story, fathering over his two children. But I do have to point out that the script is kind of weird, and a good 10% of it is just pointing out that Thor's an asshole over and over and over again. But I admire the attempt to distract us from the god-awful visuals. The CGI is pretty well done, but someone turned the saturation down to like half. It was also filmed like one of the legs on their only $20 tripod in the entire studio just snapped, so then it's got all these Dutch angles. The action too is just filled with weird cuts and little like jumps all over the place. It's really weird. An example of this is when Thor visits Iceland. It was built as this really cool moment, but the second the action kicked in, my god. But what about Thor's time on Earth? Was it? Hawkeye was pointless, Thor and Jane's relationship was just not developed at all, and Thor's sacrifice was way overplayed. The one thing I do absolutely have to give this movie credit for, though, is Thor's hammer. Every scene revolving around the hammer is really well done, whether it's the break into the facility or Thor setting it on Loki's chest in the end, revealing that he's not worthy and everything he's done was just pointless. There is a smart and fun little movie hiding in there, but you gotta dig. I have seen a worse Thor movie, but I have also seen better. Thor 4 was the most shocking shitstorm as of late. I loved Ragnarok, and I expected a similar experience here. But instead what I got was a really quick, goofy, and annoying thriller led by a moron, a mass murderer scaring children, a woman moron, a gay rock, and a bunch of gods. So, how's the villain? This god butcherer has a really interesting story that they just do not tell. So then we're left with a really badass dude with this really interesting motivation to steal children, to tempt a god to giving him his axe so he can go and wish away all gods. And all of it because a sword is making him do it. Thor's relationship with his axe was actually a really genius joke the first time, and then it got really bad. Joking about Jane's cancer, though, that wasn't funny. This movie really just treats everything like a joke, which is fitting because it's a joke. Thor's hammer coming back was kind of cool. It had a lot of new abilities and a really cool design. It just, undoes everything from Ragnarok. That whole message, gone. Thor's depression arc from the Infinity Saga is just thrown out the window. And so many basic slam dunks like Korg and Valkyrie were just missed really horribly. So originally this was gonna be like 4 placements lower than where it is. I'm not even kidding. But then the third act happened. Literally everything in the Shadow Realm was really well done. The editing, the choreography, all of the really scary bits, all of Gore's just badass stuff in general. Jane's moral dilemma about picking up the hammer again, which would basically kill her, was actually really interesting by the third act. The kids gaining the power of Thor was cheesy, but like, come on. Gore and Thor's moment after they've already reached eternity was, sure, it didn't have the build-up, but it was sweet. It was a really good ending. And fuck all of you who think it doesn't make any sense. I think Jane going to Valhalla was a great detail. So while I really want to hate this movie, it does have some awesome stuff. All I was really lacking was a better sense of direction, some more gore, and just some more prominent themes, and then boom, you have a pretty good Thor movie. But because it lacked all this and a little more, I liked Ant-Man more. I wanted to like this movie, I really did, but I kinda can. Let's start with this. It's really funny. I was kind of worried it'd age horribly, but no, it got a lot of chuckles out of me. It's cute, it's dumb, and it's funny. And that's about it. Scott Lang was a fun new addition to the Ant-Man story, and it gave Hank a lot more to do. It's well tied to Marvel with some creative, but not too complex action. Like, yeah, the suitcase and playset fights were a given. Those were gonna happen. But they still did it pretty well. I think Scott's first adventure when he first shrinks down in his apartment was really cool and a lot of fun. I really wasn't expecting Scott's father arc, but I honestly ended up enjoying it quite a bit. I'm very happy that this movie was not a horrible shitstorm. But in other ways, I'm kind of upset that it's just so okay. I kind of feel bad because I have nothing more to say, but neither did this movie. It was a very refreshing and cute movie when it came to Marvel, but it didn't really leave an impact because of that. So on to Ultron! Avengers Age of Ultron was the single biggest disappointment to me in this entire video. I defended this movie every chance I got for years. I have so many memories as a kid of just watching this movie on airplanes. I was so ready to tell everyone how actually enjoyable this movie is. But to start us off, I do love the characters, okay? The actors have such a fun time playing these characters, and it shows. Tony just goes through some more nightmare shit, creating a bunch of robots to save the world. Steve is dumbed down a lot for some reason and doesn't really get as much to do. Thor is strictly used for exposition. Bruce just gets shoved into this weird romance arc because Disney has never felt like writing a good Hulk story. Natasha gets a lot of half-assed development about her past. Clint almost dies, but he actually gets some pretty funny moments. Wanda and Pietro get nothing to do. One of them dies and the other is always edited really weirdly for some reason. And then there's sweet baby Ultron. Bro has such a cool, engaging, and interesting setup to his story. His opening scene is so cool in the Avengers Tower, and god did they mess it up! Ultron does nothing but a bunch of typical AI wants to kill human stuff. Except he tells jokes for some reason. There's so much to explore in this story that they just don't. And a lot of this culminates in Clint's farmhouse. Of all of the characters, they somehow did Hawkeye the best in this movie. I like the idea of him living these two lives and the conflict kind of getting brought to his family. But they really don't do much more than exposition in this place. But that's not why I brought it up. In this scene, there is a line that broke me.
I thought maybe you might.
Don't take from my pile.
I am not kidding when I say I spent 5 solid minutes when I first rewatched this laughing my ass off at this line, and it is the entire reason I placed it over Ant-Man. It's so bad, but it's so good, it's so good. This is the moment where I realized I forgot to write a joke that transitioned into the next movie. Oh boy, it's everyone's favorite, obviously human woman alien with powers that came from a magic space cube produced by a company with the same name as her. Captain Marvel. From the obvious storytelling and the half-assed script to the more controversial arguments and Brie Larson's dumpster fire of a Twitter and just media presence as a whole, this movie was bound to fail. But I am proud to report that this movie honestly really didn't take any of it seriously. The comedy's cute, the plot is silly, and the characters are simple, and they just embrace it. The train fight was pretty fun and easy to follow. The opening mission had its fun moments, and the ending, despite the really weird build-up, was honestly really fun, just watching her demolish these spaceships left and right. Even the stuff revolving around the Skrulls was pretty interesting. All the twists and turns were engaging, and overall they were just written in a pretty unique way. But it's got some obvious downsides. The Kree are handled really poorly, and we never get to explore their culture. Basic Mentor got turned into a basic villain, while Basic Team got turned into basic stormtroopers. But the one thing that truly made this movie suffer beyond anything else was Carol herself. Everyone fucking hates her, and for good reason. She learns nothing in this movie. She's constantly berated for showing too many emotions, and yet she still remains the most emotionless character in the MCU. Captain Marvel isn't really a complex character, and we don't need this really random connection to the Tesseract and complex story. There is fun to be had in the mystery of Captain Marvel. Hell, you know what? Make her an overpowered bitch. Do it on purpose. And then drag her across the rest of the movie. Pummel her to the ground and make her learn a lesson. Do what Ragnarok did. If we spent this movie with an overpowered piece of shit protagonist that learned the value of life and company, all building to her and a group of humans, saving this alien race from a war that her own people started, that'd be 100 times more progressive than anything Marvel has put out recently. And then the turn your brain off finale would have felt earned. Imagine if the female lead was way overpowered and was still really well written. That would have been a win for everyone. But aside from all that, I think the plot would have just been better if it was a standalone space adventure movie rather than like some Marvel cash grab, but isn't that just the case for all of them? Black Panther came out at a time when I started to become really interested in narratives, and so naturally when I started getting involved with Marvel, I analyzed this one a lot. So let's get this out of the way. The characters were awesome. Chadwick does amazing, and Shuri might be my favorite part of this movie. The jokes land like 8 or 9 times out of 10. The action comes out the gate swinging. The politics of Wakanda were pretty interesting, and the themes were there. I cannot call it bad by any stretch of the imagination, but goddamn if it ain't the most 6 out of 10 movie I've ever seen. Wakanda is a really interesting place, so much so that every time they cut to America, I don't give a shit. I personally just wanted some like full dive into Wakanda, a dive into like the people, the politics, the community, all of it. Instead, we get a slow movie with light action across 3 continents, 2 main villains, and a main character going through an arc we've already seen them go through before. I personally think that the villain of this movie should have just been an idea. Killmonger's great, but like, what better movie in Marvel's entire catalog would have been better for this? T'Challa's fucking perfect, okay? He went through his whole arc in Civil War. This movie has every right to be about governments and big ideas like that. And because of this, T'Challa's writing is pretty bad, the Jabari are completely useless, Wakanda doesn't get any deep dive past the first 10 minutes, and we have to sit through Claw's pointless ass death. Everyone knows the cinematography is phenomenal, the music goes really hard, and the chemistry between each character is just really well explored. As much as I want an idea as a villain, everyone remembers Killmonger as actually a pretty damn good villain. It had the opportunity to make a statement 5 times more powerful than the one it did, but it didn't. And the result? A rushed, empty, and unrealistic experience that you kind of just have to enjoy because the internet will not take kindly to your opinion. But the murder train does not end with Black Panther, folks, because I'm here to deliver one more lukewarm take.
3 times 1. What is it?
I recorded an entire bit for No Way Home, okay? I did the whole spiel. Oh, this movie's a lot of fun and insanely creative, but actually has a lot of thematic, narrative, and corporate issues that a lot of people overlook. Blah, 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 blah. But I'm not satisfied with how I covered this movie originally, so I'm actually back recording this a few weeks later to clarify some things. And spoilers, Endgame pops up far later in this list, and it's also a nonsensical, universe-changing movie. So what's the difference? My original review was really just a long tangent about the corporate side of this movie. And yeah, I still stand by what I said. This movie makes a mockery of Strange, has some random guy from a 20-year-old movie kill Aunt May, teaches Peter's lesson through the brute force intervention of another Peter, and wipes everyone in the MCU's minds of Peter, just so that they could have all 3 Spider-Men on screen together and make some bank. But other than all of that, it's just plain unsatisfying. Endgame builds on so many characters' stories, giving them natural, thematic conclusions to decade-old arcs. And because of this, that movie rightfully earned its turn your brain off finale. No Way Home Peter wants everyone to forget he's Spider-Man. So after fucking up the multiverse, 5 characters that have no relation to this Peter or any of the themes covered in this movie just show up. They try to kill him, only to not want to, only to then want to again. This leads Osborn to kill May, which again could have just been avoided if Strange explained the spell for 5 minutes. Then Peter meets Peter meets Peter, big ol' montage of callbacks, massive fight for Box that they want to destroy, or use, I'm not too sure. Sandman should want to go home as established before. Doc Ock is cured by now. The Lizard says jack shit, and I guess it makes sense for Electro to want to destroy the box. Overall, the final fight really doesn't mean anything. It's just a bunch of Spider-Man whatevers doing what Spider-Man whatevers do best. Having brutal fun. The Peters save the day. Everyone forgets Peter exists. My mans is lonely, and now, at the end of Tom Holland's 6th appearance as Spider-Man, his character finally learns that with great power comes great responsibility. None of what I just said discounts the awesome fights, the insane concepts, the badass lines, the awesome visuals, the fun moments, the hilarious humor. When you look at this movie as pure Spider-Man fun and nothing else, it might very well be the best Spider-Man movie ever. But as a genuine attempt to build on this character's themes, its story, and tell a bigger story with some genuine emotion and heart in it, boy does it fall flat. I can't call it bad. I really can't. But I can call it upsetting. So upsetting that I ranked Ant-Man 2 over it. If you know me, then you know that my favorite stories have complex characters, intricate ideas and themes, and just really big pictures tied in. This movie doesn't have any of that, but I still really like it. Ant-Man and the Wasp is just downright cute, okay? Leave me alone. Scott's new dad arc is really entertaining. Hope was a lot cooler and funnier. Luis is such a goofball in this one and it works way better. Hank doesn't really go through any arc or character development, but he has fun conversations and his ties with this Foster guy is pretty neat. The goofy mob of evil businessmen was hilarious. And the main villain of this movie is weird, okay? It's unexplained and it's kind of poorly developed, but man, if they didn't at least try with something really interesting that weirdly parallels Ant-Man's like quantum shrinking and growing stuff that they phase through, like the way the science works. It's interesting. They tried. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. I mean, can you blame them? They were using all their brain power to find new random stuff to shrink and grow. I will say that this movie is filled with a bunch of cliches. Like the number of times they said, oh, we could do this, but no, it's too dangerous. Okay, fine, we'll do it. Got annoying. Then there's the ending. Opposite of Thor: Love and Thunder. The ending was really bad. It's the part of the movie where you realize Ghost's plan doesn't make any sense, but that doesn't matter because it's all reduced in a second because of fucking Janet. She just solves the entire issue of the movie in like 2 minutes. It's so dumb. Sure, they handled the romance between Scott and Hope. It's fine. And there's also this FBI dude that had fun chemistry with Scott. But this ending did genuinely ruin a bunch of the cute build-up for me. But overall, this movie did what Ant-Man does best, giving us a refreshing, cute little story right before Endgame. It's nothing special, but that's what makes it special. Moving on. Alright, we're finally about to get into the pretty damn good movies. The weird thing about these next 6, though, is that they're all the same to me. Like, they're interchangeable on this list. But now we're here with Civil War. Obviously, living up to the hype of one of the most famous comic book storylines ever was gonna present a lot of challenges. But honestly, it did it pretty well. Don't get me wrong, this movie is riddled with nitpicks. Why wasn't Bucky wearing his mask during this opening scene? This guy just straight up would not drown in this trap. The pauses for an audience applause during Scott Lang and Peter Parker's introductions were really fucking awful. But my personal favorite, after Tony's presentation about his parents leaving him, he says they never made it to the airport. And it is clear as day in this flashback. But they die at like midnight on this camera footage. How long is their drive to the airport? Whereas Black Panther could have gone without a villain, but still had a pretty good one, this movie should not have had a villain, and it suffered because of it. But realistically, there's only one massive issue with this movie that I really care about. And that's the entire plot. This scene. If you know this movie, you know this scene. It's the scene that tears the Avengers apart with the Sokovia Accords, and my god do I hate it. And not because it's making me uncomfortable, because I'm getting revealed that the good guys are really doing all this bad stuff. No. I hate it because that's what the directors think it's doing. An unstoppable alien invasion hits New York, and Tony Stark personally saves the day by sending the nuke the government sent to destroy Manhattan through a wormhole. Steve helped demolish genocide machines built by the government after they were taken over by Nazis. Wanda diverted a bomb from a cramped crowd and Steve to a largely empty building. And Ultron... yeah. But let's think about this for a second. The Sokovia Accords sounds a lot like what Tony was trying to do with the artificial intelligence. Will they do any better? I mean, like, they also want Tony's tech, so like... But now that that's out of the way, turn your brain off, because it's a pretty fun movie. It's really well paced with good acting, good visuals, and great fights. Plus, there's the final fight. Ignore all of the bad build-up. Ignore all of the nonsensical motivations and whatnot. You feel the final fight no matter what. It is intense and it is really well choreographed. So I gotta hand it to this movie. I did not think I would like it that much, but it fared surprisingly well. Which is a statement you're gonna hear a lot coming up. Guardians of the Galaxy is pretty much the de facto Marvel movie nowadays. It's the one even I would suggest you show someone that doesn't know Marvel very well. But it's got flaws. And I'll start with Drax. I maybe laughed at one of his jokes in this entire movie. He was shockingly unfunny. He wasn't cool enough to justify how threatening they tried to make him at the start, but then he didn't become funny enough to justify how dumb they tried to make him by the end. I liked all the other Guardians though. Groot is pretty goofy, and despite his lack of vocabulary, he and Rocket bounce off of each other really well. Yondu was neat, but not anywhere near his level in the sequel. Gamora was fascinating to watch. Her arc was fun but dark, and she threw a neat element into this movie. And Quill's just a flat out really good protagonist. He's charming and funny while also having pretty interesting flaws. One thing you eventually come to notice in this movie that you can't really unsee is how many times they change the aspect ratio of the film. It's like at least twice every scene. But this does not distract from the awesome visuals. Whether it's a bunch of jets flying at each other, a dance-off, or that really cool fight for the orb by the end, every fight is just really engaging. And the plot's interesting. A human stolen from Earth, a scary daughter of an incredibly powerful maniac, a cyborg raccoon alien with guns, a vengeful prisoner, and a tree all band together to make money off an orb that accidentally leads them to saving the entire planet by harnessing the power of power itself. I mean, the villain's dumb. I really did not like the villain at all, but hey, music's good. I really don't have much to say. This movie was such a fresh change of pace and brought so much new shit to the scene that every movie after it ended up copying it, so it doesn't feel new anymore, even though at the time this was crazy new stuff. And that's why it's right here in the direct middle of the list. It's so goofy yet emotional that no matter what direction you're coming from, you'll always find something about it you like. It is truly neutral while also taking a bunch of awesome risks. And that's why it's here. I knew coming into this movie that it would be loaded to the brim with a bunch of bullshit. But Angela Bassett's speeches were well more than enough to get my ass in the theater. Now let's address one thing. Disney is absolutely capitalizing off the death of Chadwick Boseman. There's no question there. However, the individuals behind this film, I don't think so. This movie feels like it was made with love, not greed. This movie isn't a product of Chadwick's death. They had to account for it. Do I wish they did it a little differently? Yeah, but I'm pretty happy with what we got. Especially because Shuri was my absolute favorite character in the first, and she does surprisingly well here. Her arc's conclusion was rushed, but the story is there. Everything revolving around the Queen hit real hard, and her acting was incredible. Okoye and Nakia were so much more fun in this movie, and they got some real badass moments too. Namor is such a cool villain, just kind of in concept, and they do him pretty good here. Questionable intents aside, you get such a fun dive into this character's psyche. Hell, even Killmonger's tiny moments were pretty well handled. Then there's Agent Ross. And again with Shuri, I was pretty worried that they were gonna turn her into another like Captain Marvel type character, but no. If there's one thing this movie did really good, it's having cool characters tell a cool story. The fighting was brutal, the deaths were tragic, and the build-up was a lot of fun. The effects were fucking incredible, a huge step up from the original. I was pretty disappointed that they undid all of the opening up of the country T'Challa did in the original. I really want a movie that just explores the streets of Wakanda, and I thought we were gonna get it, and then the entire place flooded, so. But can we also talk about how dark this movie is? And I don't mean themes or story, I mean the lighting. Every shot is either underwater or pitch black until the really bright finale and it's just all in your face. This movie is the embodiment of having this really cool idea that has to get warped a bunch because of unforeseen circumstances. Namor is no Killmonger, Riri just wrinkle brains her way out of everything, and all of the hunt for vibranium moments felt pretty forced. And I know for the past like 6 movies I've ranked, I've had this one big thing that's like, this is what ruined the movie for me. But here it's pretty just like a personal thing. I just think that this movie would have been a lot more interesting if it took place within that year that they skipped over at the start. What can I say? I'm a sucker for really, really interesting stories that get executed perfectly fine by talented people. And that's the part where you're supposed to cut to Winter Soldier. I originally put Winter Soldier at like 18, but every time I've had to write this, I've moved it up a spot. And this movie's weird because there's a lot of bad choices and little nitpicks you can laugh at. And yet when it's over and you really think about it, you're kind of shocked, like it was pretty good. This movie is so well planned out, so engaging and so intricate that I feel like I'm being gaslit into thinking it's good. I mean, just the concept alone is crazy. Hydra running S.H.I.E.L.D. this entire time? The most famous person on the planet, Captain America, becoming a fugitive? Bucky still living and being turned into a genocidal maniac? It is the most goofy and over the top a really grounded and serious movie can get without feeling weird. The only main complaints I can immediately think of are that the fights were surprisingly okay. Punches often barely landed, fights were drawn out, and every 5 seconds they do that like pause Marvel always does in the middle of fights where they get a glance, maybe they say like a line each and then go back to fighting. But that's why I appreciate stuff like the elevator fight way more. It's one of the most badass things Cap has ever done, even if it is really weirdly edited. And that's my only other complaint. The editing is really bad. The CGI is actually crazy. Let me put that out there first. They did a really good job on that. But it's the cutting and warping of shots that I hate. The quick cuts, the slowing and speeding of shots, all the shaky cam. Again, they do drop this from the final fight, but again, they kept it for the elevator fight, which really pissed me off, but I digress. They built a really engaging and fun friendship between Cap and Natasha, even if they did have a bunch of weird lines. Everything just fits so perfectly and builds to one of my favorite endings in all of Marvel. The bad guy, the main bad guy, Hydra still loses, but the main bad guy wins. He defeats Cap, they fall into the lake, but he saves him and then runs off to question everything he knows. It concludes this movie, but it sets up a bunch of cool stuff. So yeah, I really like this one. But it's still not Cap's best. This movie is just so damn charming, it's hard not to enjoy. The characters, the story, the music, the writing, the choreography, the cool sets, it all just builds to such a fun experience. Howard Stark is in it, Vibranium is in it, an Infinity Stone is in it, and all of it wrapped around a really grounded story about World War II and American propaganda. Like, what in the where did we get this? Steve has got to be Marvel's best protagonist. He's goofy, but he's serious, driving the plot with ease. And his chemistry with Peggy was pretty believable. I mean, it was there. They do have this really stupid third act, character split apart argument, whatever is bad. I think the movie was pretty well paced. We got a lengthy introduction to Steve and then montages skipped past all the stuff that wasn't really that important. There's all the heist and planning for the war and then going all the way over to Hydra's base. And then there's the ending. An ending just long enough for Bucky's death, for a bunch of awesome plane fights, and then enough for the really, really terrible ending fight. Red Skull and Cap are really, really boring here, but it's okay because it is then followed with one of, if not maybe Marvel's best ending ever. Steve sacrifices himself while comforting Peggy, then wakes up 70 years later and goes insane. The movie does get very Marvel-y, like bombastic and action-packed as it goes along, but that does make sense. We got our time with Steve at the start. Give me the turn your brain off action now. And the action's pretty good for the most part. It's engaging and feels real. I mean, the infiltrating of the Hydra base was really fun to watch. And that's really what sells this movie. It feels real. Marvel didn't hold much back with this one, and I really appreciate that. It's cute, it's dark, it's funny, and it's just flat out cool. And you don't need much more in a Captain America story. The Avengers is really good for 2012, and if anything, despite its flaws, is probably the best Marvel could have done with their first Avengers film. Now, does that mean it's perfect? No, but I still really like it, so I'll make this quick. I love the characters, I love the action, I love the twists and turns, I love the way they all fight each other, and I really like the music. Clint has very close ties with S.H.I.E.L.D., so he spends a lot of the movie brainwashed until he's able to come back by the end. Natasha gets a surprising amount of dialogue, being the glue that really brings all the guys together. Banner really wants to stay on the bus and not do any of the fighting stuff, stay with the science. But he's not really able to keep the Hulk at bay. Thor is just here to see his brother, but I see that smile, Thor. Don't lie. You like these guys. Cap really just desperately wants to keep whatever this new weird threat is away from whatever this new weird world he's woken up is. But the way he thinks conflicts with the others. Such as Tony, the genius billionaire playboy philanthropist that cannot trust S.H.I.E.L.D. for 2 seconds. And Loki, the villain, he's just a maniac and they embrace it. But I think seeing all of the Avengers work together to stop him is just as engaging as seeing them all fight each other. It is 95% just comic book silliness, so when it does try to get serious, it falls apart, but the rest of it is a lot of fun. It's got poor cinematography, weird writing at times, and a lot of random bullshit that feels like they just threw in on the spot, but it does what it needs to. It's just pure fun. So with that being said, let's move on to the 10 that I really like. Thor Ragnarok was, for years, my favorite Marvel movie. And while I still hail it as easily the best Thor movie, it's got a lot of flaws I was not expecting. Odin was real boring and his death was handled very poorly. Hela, while intimidating and funny, only served one connection to Thor at all, and it's just that she's his sister. Thor's big moment where he realizes that he isn't just the hammer, he's just kinda said to him in this weirdly edited vision, but the most offensive part of this movie is, you guessed it, the Hulk. I hate him. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Disney does not know how to write a Hulk story. Sure, he's pretty funny and cool to watch, but he's treated like a complete dumbass, and really just like a leech on Banner's life. It's really annoying. But Thor was really fun to watch. He just got beat and beat and beat, and he never stepped down. Loki was a blast in this movie. It's easily my favorite rendition of him in the entire MCU. He's a goofball with real emotion behind him. Strange was a lot of fun, as was the Grandmaster, the weirdest yet somehow most genius villain for that planet. And Valkyrie was really good here, which is great because she stunk in Love and Thunder. She has weird moments, but overall she's fun and interesting. And she has really good chemistry with Loki, of all people. And that's where the main points end. I could talk about Surtur, I could talk about the Bifrost fight, I could talk about the writing, the choreography, the really cool cinematography, all the colors, the really fun fights. But I really don't need to. It's unfortunate the rest of the Thor series is just so bad, because this one showed a lot of potential for the character. As for a better character, Marvel had to come out of the gate swinging with Iron Man, or else their entire empire as we know it would never have existed. And oh boy did they swing. The music nor the editing would work in any other Marvel movie, but here it works to make this cute little starter for the franchise. And speaking of cute, let's talk plot. Multi-billionaire Tony Stark gets his egotistical ass captured by terrorists, so some scientist puts a generator in Tony's chest to keep shrapnel from killing him and teamed up with him to make a flying murder machine to escape, which Tony recreates later to fly and fuck with the government in. And then his boss tries to kill him. Tony is an amazing protagonist in this movie. The way his entire worldview changes once he's captured, the way he goes against Obadiah, and the way he just starts off the movie as a complete narcissist. And Obadiah was a really cool character for most of the movie. The scene where he paralyzes Tony with that little device is bone-chilling, like actually. Then he just starts killing people for no reason. That was dumb. I love how Stark Industries is explored as this concept and the way it's just begun supplying terrorists. Seeing Tony and Jensen build the first suit was tense. Watching Tony later master the tech was even more fun. His fight with the Air Force jets was crazy, and every suit-up scene is so badass. I am a sucker for a well-done introduction of a character, and no other movie in the MCU did that better than this. Oh, and then there's the ending, which I really like in context of watching it back then. Without the knowledge that a cinematic universe was on the way, you could have actually thought that Tony was gonna die. Like, this might have been a one-off movie, and this final fight would have been really tense in that situation. It would have been crazy thinking that maybe he was gonna die. And I just think that is really cool. Of course, then he did 20 movies later, and we got... Yeah, Yeah, I'll keep this one short. Endgame is the highest grossing Marvel movie to date. The plot, the characters, the action, it all feels like it came straight from a comic book. Natasha actually gets shit to do, ending a silent yet compelling arc I wasn't originally all into. Clint comes out of the gate with a pretty badass scene and kind of compelling story. The final scene these two ever share is crazy. It was really well executed. Obviously, Banner's random transformation off screen is really stupid and boring, but as a source of comedic relief, he's pretty good. Thor was definitely used for fat jokes and didn't really have a conclusion to any arc, but he did have genuine emotion in his character. Steve gets some of the dopest shit ever. Reuniting with Tony, lifting Mjolnir, the whole Avengers Assemble moment, all wrapped up in him finally getting that dance. And then there's Tony. I'm just gonna skip him. Crazy fun character with satisfying as fuck conclusion. You knew that. Thanos was great in Infinity War for showing emotion and being a genuine villain. In this movie, he's cool because he is pure badass, murderous maniac. He goes insane. It really makes the final fight that much more intense. And this movie's pretty good at that stuff. You feel the intensity of the action, you feel the lifelessness of New York, and you feel the comic booky nature of the time travel. Again, the Avengers Assemble moment is absolutely amazing, and the fact that that one really long shot even exists gets me smiling. Hell, during the opening title card, there's only half of the orchestra playing. That is such a crazy detail I never would have thought of. I'm certain there's not a single surprise soul watching this. Obviously, this movie was gonna at the very least be in the top 10. The thing is though, what could have possibly been better than Endgame? Tom Holland's second Spider-Man movie was a little disappointing on rewatch. And then on rewatch, I really liked it. When I first watched this, I was hoping for a small, cute cherry on top after the massive movie that was Endgame. And while it was small-scaled, it was not cute, nor a cherry. This movie tackles Tony Stark's death, Peter's new responsibilities, his new relationship with MJ, a secret maniac befriending him, and the attempted murder of all of his classmates. It's a lot, but I gotta say, it's very well balanced. Peter's having trouble trusting himself and filling the shoes that Tony left him. Meanwhile, the villain is this guy that uses illusion after illusion to fill this power vacuum and fool everyone he can that tries to stop him, including Peter. And that illusion fight was fucking brilliant. And while we're here, Tom Holland and Jake Gyllenhaal have just awesome chemistry. I feel like I don't need to say it, but it's so obvious when watching the movie. This was probably Ned's best movie in the franchise, and that's saying a lot because I love him in pretty much every movie. And MJ2 was at her peak here. It was great. Those are two very important relationships to get right in these stories, and they nailed it, both the writers and the directors. And the actors. And I really like how they tackle the mystery here, because everyone watching knows that Mysterio is the bad guy. But we're waiting really intensely to see how the hell Peter finds this out. And what's funny is he does so much cliche superhero stuff that it's kind of brilliant because he's trying to be a cliche superhero and fill Tony's shoes. Edith was kind of a weird plot point, but it made sense for something symbolically to show how the power is getting passed around, so it works, I guess. I like this new May. I like this new feast. I like Peter ghosting Fury. I like Mysterio's chilling death, and I like the ending. And as for the other stuff I didn't like, there were a bunch of green screen issues, weirdly. All the scroll stuff was pointless. I don't know why they included it. The whole vault stuff at the end with Happy and MJ and whatever, that was just bad. I did not like it. And that's it. Iron Man 3 is the Cinderella story of the MCU. How has this underdog hid for so long? Iron Man 3 is by far my favorite Iron Man movie, and maybe my favorite rendition of the character in this cinematic universe. He's going insane, growing attached to his suits, implanting telepathic chips in his skin for them, and losing sleep over his nightmares. All because of New York. And this all coincides with a new terrorist threat plaguing America, because it's just always terrorists with Tony Stark. So he leaks his address. That's actually a pretty Tony Stark thing to do. But that leads into probably my favorite Iron Man fight ever. And I know he ends up in Tennessee after losing battery, but his old suits had perfect battery flying to Afghanistan and back. So how many times did he circle the planet before ending up in Tennessee? But as the Mandarin grows in power, Tony's chased by these crazy cool self-destructing businessmen in what is probably the other coolest fight in Iron Man history. This airplane scene was crazy intense, but also weirdly wholesome, seeing everyone work together. And what's that? The final fight was badass and really well paced. That's a first for Iron Man. He's got a lot of narration in this movie, which was goofy but acceptable. Pepper was definitely the best she's ever been, actually tying into all the emotional conflict. Happy had a stake in this movie, getting himself involved in all sorts of things, like the single scariest scene in all of Phase 2. Then there's the villains. Sure, I and most people wish the Mandarin was handled differently, but if we're able to just accept that this is how it is, they did a pretty damn good job with this new version. By this point, Tony has narratively removed himself from governments and terrorists and whatnot, so realistically, they probably would have fucked up an actual Mandarin story. I like that the Mandarin is just this concept rather than a person. Of course, Killian then does refer to himself as the Mandarin later in the movie, but we're just gonna ignore that part. Killian had pretty interesting ties to Tony, and his actor made damn sure that he was gonna be really charming in one scene and absolutely horrifying in another. I just think it's obvious that this movie is really just a love letter to Tony Stark. Not to mention that I just got distracted from taking notes. Like, I was that engaged that I just didn't take notes for like the last third. So let's keep this train of movies you would just definitely not expect in someone's top 10 rolling, because up next is Marvel's other Tony Stark. Hailed for having bland characters, mediocre jokes, and a passable plot that is only really tied together by neat visuals, I bet no one was expecting this one. And neither was I. Strange really does seem like another Tony Stark, Christine's love plot was really boring, and Caecilius was just so not engaging when he wasn't bouncing off Strange. But, shut up. Every shot, every ounce of magic felt new, it felt refreshing. They play so much with portals and the mirror dimension, along with fights so insane that you can't tell where up is, but you're still somehow able to follow the action. This movie does fall victim to the whole, like, say medical buzzword cliche that a lot of medical movies do. But outside of that, it actually has some pretty engaging scenes revolving around surgery and implants. But what I actually love about the first third is that you fucking hate Strange. I mean, clearly I thought it was a lot of fun seeing someone who thinks they're so right about everything being slammed through the floorboards of reality to learn their lesson. Plus, his chemistry with Wong and the Ancient One was really cool. It's probably because they're all just amazing actors. I love the Everspin, I love how he just steals from the library, I love how he begins questioning everything, and I love how the theme of time is played with. I gotta admit, it does have a lot of exposition that builds up to a bunch of niche shit, but that niche shit was made for me. For example, Caecilius. The fight between him and Strange about halfway through this movie is so intricate and so fun while you watch Strange just kind of learn how to do all this magic. Then the cape comes along to help defeat him and we begin to learn his motives. He doesn't have any deep connection with Strange, he isn't set up for anything outside of this movie. The entire point is that he's just some random nutjob taught by the Ancient One. This movie's theme is time, so what does the villain want? Eternal time, so much so that he becomes Dormammu's slave over it. And when he calls the people he's killed small and useless specks in an indifferent universe, Strange sees a bit of himself in this guy. That is how you build a character. It's kind of crazy how quickly this movie makes you go from questioning Strange to questioning literally everything else. But then there's the finale, and it's great. There's one small fight while time is moving backwards, which in and of itself is just awesome. But by this point, the villain's already won. So Strange sacrifices himself like 60 times over to fucking Dormammu to save his dimension. I have to know what the pitch for this scene looked like. I feel like even though everyone agrees Guardians of the Galaxy 2 is good, no one ever talks about it. But what makes it so much better than the original in my eyes? Well, it's the fact that it's better. The characters, the story, the emotion, the jokes, it's all just better. It has a very strong and unique take on family and isolation when it comes to the MCU. Yondu, Rocket, Quill, they all have really amazing moments. Even though everyone knew Ego would turn out evil, it still cuts really deep seeing Quill find out. He didn't need to be complex, he just needed to be scary. But now we've got this really compelling and interesting dad we've got to fight. Quill and Gamora were much more of a blast in this movie than they were before. Their chemistry is actually there this time. Drax was actually really good here, I did really like him. He and Mantis were a genius duo and I'm really glad they added her. But the stars are Baby Groot and Rocket. Because Baby Groot was just a really well executed bit and Rocket carried genuine comedy and genuine emotion all throughout the movie. I mean, once you're in, you're in. This movie ain't slowing down for you and I love it. The opening fight is iconic, the chase after was really cool, all of Rocket's shenanigans were really fun, and the finale, had flaws, but overall it was cool as fuck. The only thing I can really complain about that should have been fixed was Nebula's story. Guardians 3 is quite possibly the only upcoming Marvel movie that I A, have hope for, and B, am gonna go see. But since a lot of you could probably kinda see this one coming, let's move on to a Phase 4 movie? Who let this guy in?
I'm calling it now.
I love this movie. I may think that Infinity War and Homecoming are better, but out of every movie in this entire list, I'd rather watch this one again. The only two complaints I have are as follows. There is so much exposition and narration, it gets pretty irritating. There's usually cool effects during these narrations, and I guess I'll take what I can get, but still. My second complaint, Katie and Shang are just friends. Which is actually amazing. For the first time in Marvel history, they can have a female and a male just be friends. However, Disney was clearly also very proud of this because they needed to verbally point it out to the audience. Anywho, the rest is just really good. Shang-Chi is the most refreshing and entertaining protagonist we've gotten since Peter was introduced. I love that he isn't the chosen one or some random guy on the streets that just gets powers. No, he was raised to be a murder machine and now he's running from his past. This means the action comes to him, but it's completely natural. His dad is really intimidating villain driven by emotion as well as just being powerful as fuck while also being manipulated. Plus everything revolves around this pretty neat and well built up family drama that ends up building to probably the coolest fight in MCU history. Katie was somehow really well handled the whole time. I mean, her bow bit at the end was like, you know, whatever, but what else are you gonna do with her by that point? Shang's sister was a slow burn, but a fascinating one. The Mandarin actor is the most random and goofy little shit that so did not deserve to be in this movie, but I love that he is. But he's also got this cute, almost flying dog thing that leads them to this ancient village. All of the animals, set design, and culture spread about this new village they find was so fun to explore. Shang vs. Dad is intense as hell and so well choreographed. You feel those fucking punches. Shang vs. Dad rematch is somehow a lot more emotional and a lot more crazy. And then of course there's Shang vs. fucking Dragon. Both those are not the only good fights in this movie because there's also all of the other ones. I am being deadass. From the bus to the building site to the fight club, absolutely none of it fails. The opening fight may be a bit of an acquired taste, but to me, his mom's style of fighting is such an interesting juxtaposition to his dad's. So all of that to say, you take this movie, you crank up the emotion and grandness to 70, and you get Infinity War. Avengers Infinity War is the best Marvel movie, hands down. It is objectively the most complex, grand, and all-encompassing movie they've ever made, with its only issue being the Hulk. Because fuck the Hulk. Bro has one cool fight then just hides for the rest of the movie. What are you doing? This movie has like 100 characters and uses about 99% of them exactly how I would've. Thanos is the protagonist and he's awesome. His first appearance on screen is him holding Thor like a rag doll. That is a threatening as hell villain. But what makes him such a great villain is the fact that he doesn't really like killing. That's why he goes for the stones. It's mercy to him. The villain of this movie cries when he has to kill his daughter. That is a character. And damn was it emotional. This entire movie was emotional. But the emotion train doesn't stop with sadness because this movie plays with every single string your heart's got. The intensity of Thanos versus Strange and Tony, the unnerving energy of Thanos marching towards Wanda with ease, the hype from Thor landing on Earth, the hilarity of the chemistry between every goddamn actor somehow. Tony has such a fascinating story being told here, and Cap's return was brilliant. Thor was dope as hell with one of the more impactful arcs in this movie. All of the Guardians were so goofy yet so important. Peter was just kind of shoved in here and it still works somehow. I mean, his death is infamous for a reason. It's just so much random, genius bullshit that manages to work. But I have one last thing to say. Look at this shot. Now look at this one. This is the most beautiful movie Marvel has made. And that was my rant. I thought about making some big build up to my number one, but you know it's Homecoming. Alright, I don't need to hide anything. Let's just cut to it. This is the best Spider-Man movie by far. I don't understand how someone looks at this movie and thinks that this bullshit, or even this bullshit comes at all close.
Hi, I'm editing this video and I feel like I should clarify that I didn't even think about Across the Spider-Verse coming out so soon. And so I didn't even think about just saying that this is the best live-action Spider-Man movie. The Spider-Verse films they're masterpieces, let's be honest. They are some of the best just animated films ever. So, there's that.
From the MCU's best villain, don't at me, to some of the coolest web-slinging, funniest jokes, and most realistic and down-to-earth Peter we've ever gotten on screen, this movie's got a lot for you. We gotta talk about all the love poured into it. It is so obviously a film that was made by people who actually care about this character and story. It has the soul that No Way Home was missing. This Peter Parker and his high school in general just feel a lot more realistic, and for this story it made a lot of sense. Peter is a genuine dork, but he's never beat. He's just never acknowledged in the first place. I also think it's really cool that we get a Peter that understands his responsibility, but hasn't yet been able to trust his power. He could have just asked Liz out the whole time, but he didn't trust himself. Meanwhile, he's trying to become the next Iron Man while not really thinking about becoming the first Spider-Man. Ned too was brilliant and I loved every second of him. Tony's inclusion was surprisingly natural for a movie that is so desperately wanting to be included with the rest of the MCU. May was sweet and refreshing, Happy was goofy, Flash was a fun new take on the character. And then there's Liz. I like Liz, I think she works as a love interest, but mostly because of her badass father. The Vulture in this movie is terrifying and brilliant and really cool, and I have no idea how to accurately describe it. From being utterly terrifying to having some of the most genuine and understandable motives, he was so incredibly well written. The way he easily pieces together Peter's double life and then actively threatens him in what is basically just a really twisted dad talk. His suit is, again, really terrifying, but also makes complete logical sense while also looking very badass. The fights with it are so cool. The dynamic between the Vulture and Peter is obviously really good, but their fights are nothing to ignore. In fact, they're the show stealers. Every action scene is so intense and creative, each one becoming a one-of-a-kind spectacle. The plot flows so naturally, the characters develop really well, and the conclusion is so satisfying. Peter's arc was painful yet really rewarding. The moment where he lifts up the rubble and is able to accept his power and responsibility, that hit me like no other movie here. It's really unfortunate that Spider-Man joined so late in the MCU because now his movies just kind of have to conform to whatever else is going on in the universe. Peter's first movie happened because Tony had to recruit him for Civil War, Peter's second movie happened because Tony died, and Peter's third movie happened because they needed to get the multiverse ball rolling. But at the end of the day, it's a really cute series made by people who understand the modern world almost as well as they understand the original Spider-Man comics. Screw No Way Home. This is a movie with an actually engaging story behind it. But not only that, it's just plain good cinema. Oh, shoot. I have spent 6 months on this video. I feel free now, I don't know. I love some of these movies, don't get me wrong, and I cannot help but respect the hell out of what the MCU has left behind for us. Hell, I never even talked about the TV shows, and that's cause I don't actually know. They were all fine. Personally, Moon Knight was probably my favorite, but that's really just because I didn't know anything about him as a character before it. Then there's Loki and WandaVision, two obvious slam dunks. Hawkeye was cute. I'm still glad they made it a very small scale story instead of trying to make it big and grand like all the other shows. The Falcon and Guy with Metal Arms show was decently dark with fun adventures. I just think it sort of suffered as we reached the ending. Y'all definitely overreacted with She-Hulk, by the way. Like, it's probably the worst, don't get me wrong, but how would you have done it? At least they commit. And I'll be honest, I haven't seen the rest, but they look cute. But all that aside, this video isn't called a farewell to Marvel for no reason. I'm done. I began this project so that I could watch every one of these movies, rank them, and have some closure so that I could just leave. I've only been wrapped up in these shenanigans since Ragnarok, but already I can't really stand it. So I'm done. Is what I said like 6 months ago. But since then I've watched the first Doctor Strange. I watched Wakanda Forever. I watched Iron Man 3, The Avengers, Iron Man 1, and all for the first time. This studio makes some really cool shit when they just let their directors go wild. Case in point, Shang-Chi. It is the only Phase 4 movie in the entire top 10, and it has fuck all to do with the rest of Marvel. It's a martial arts crime family movie with dragons, magic, superheroes, demons, and humor. Lots of fucking humor. The closest Phase 4 project to it in my ranking was Wakanda Forever at 14th, and even that was still pretty good because it felt like a genuine passion project. Hell, my main issues with it were that they were trying to make a new Iron Man and that they were trying to capitalize off of Chadwick's death. Iron Man 3 took risk after risk trying to put Tony in new situations we had never seen him in before, and I loved that. Doctor Strange played mind games with Dormammu back in 2016, need I say more? And let's not forget the Guardians franchise. They are probably some of the most famous superheroes right now just because of how refreshing and awesome they are to watch in this never-ending cesspool of basic-ass superhero films. This video can't really be a farewell to Marvel the company, or even the franchise. This video is just a farewell to the Marvel formula. People are tired of the same gimmick over and over and over again, and with the Infinity Saga long behind us, we need a new phase that is willing to reflect this new era. The multiverse is so out there and so weird that it allows for all this random cool shit to be made. But instead, Marvel's making a Black Widow film that is set right before Endgame, a Thor film to set up Love, an Eternals movie that does jack shit, and a Spider-Man movie to set up a Doctor Strange movie to probably set up another Doctor Strange movie that will then probably set up the Kang Dynasty. Ooh, They need to give more freedom to their directors, along with more time. Film is a form of art after all, and so when Marvel is just churning out project after project trying to meet this quota and make some money, that's insulting to the industry. And that's saying a lot, because this industry is kind of messed up. So, where are we now? Guardians 3 is shaping up to look pretty good. In fact, I'm gonna go and watch it, and I know this video is coming out after it's released, so here's my review. Movie, good. It's incredibly creative, funny, action-packed, but the one thing you've probably seen everywhere is that it's sad. And yeah, it's emotional as hell. There's not another MCU movie quite like this one. And if I had to honestly rank it, I think I would genuinely put it in between Shang-Chi and Infinity War. Now, does this mean I have high hopes for the future? But, you know, Deadpool will probably be fun. The future is very much a toss-up between, oh, our movies have been performing like shit, let's crank it up to 11, throw every visual effect we can into these, go back to what made us popular, more jokes, more merch, more celebrities, and get me videos of Spider-Man! Or, oh, our movies have been performing like shit, let's take a step back, slow down, and maybe take another swing in the dark like we did for the Avengers, and Guardians, and even Iron Man, you know, the risk that started this whole thing. This is a lot of yelling into a void, and I know that. It's just sad to see Marvel go out like this. But with FNAF, Iron Lung, and the Nintendo Cinematic Universe on the way, it looks like gaming's having their slice of the pie. And honestly, I'm pretty excited for that. So this is all just to say, I like movies. Then fuck you, Disney. Absolutely screw you and everything you do. I hope the live-action Moana and Wish can't even make $10 million combined. So yeah, thanks for watching, and at this rate, I'll see you next year.